Good morning. So we took advantage of the long weekend this past week to have my parents and my little sister come out to help celebrate Essie's first birthday. And honestly, that's no small ask of them. You know, they live in Cincinnati, and my mom's had several spinal surgeries over the years, and my younger sister gets seizures if she gets car sick. And so my dad has to plan in a stop every couple hours. So it ends up taking them 10 or 12 hours to get here. And we all know how expensive gas is and 3 meals on the road. And so you kind of say in some way that it costs them a lot, both in terms of finances, but also present comfort to come. And so it was not missed by me then that when they finally did arrive, that the first thing my mom did was get on the floor and start to play with Essie. Because I knew that was going to cost her weeks laid up back at home after the fact to do that one thing. And that's when I think it really hit me, that to my parents, what it cost them financially didn't matter. What it cost them in terms of present comfort didn't matter. All that mattered in the moment to them that they valued most was just some FaceTime with their granddaughter. That's what was most important to them. And so it got me thinking a little bit about the things that we value in this life. And some of you know that I lost my patriarchal grandmother this past year. And sometimes when that happens, families get weird and they do some weird stuff. And so I was asking my dad, how we had handled loss traditionally through the years. And so we started with not my grandmother, but my great-grandmother. And I said, when we lost great-grandma Jessie, how did the family react? Who got what, and how did we handle that? And he said, well, some things your grandfather got he wanted, some he didn't. Two of the things he didn't get, he said the first one was your great-grandma Jessie's house. And that's a house that was really important to me. It's actually where I received my calling into ministry. I just didn't know it at the time. When I was 4 or 5 years old, after spending the night with her on a weekend, she would always just call me her little preacher boy. And so, she was doing that all the way back then. And actually, the reason we call Esther Essie is after great-grandma Jessie, because what she valued was investing in her grandchildren and in her great-grandchildren. And so we were talking about that house. She says, well, your great-aunt got the house. And the thing is, she loves that house. She grew up in that house. She kind of treasures that house. And so nobody's ever lived in it because she can't bear the thought of somebody else living in it. She's scared they might mess it up. But they've never sold it because she can't bear the thought of giving it up. Somebody get that kid out of here. Just kidding. It's my kid. Sorry, if you're a guest, that's my kid. I saw some guests with some looks for a second. And so she loved and she cherished that house. And she loved it so much that, like I said, there was no tenants in there. The only tenant was a little hamster that lived there for 2 years because it was too loud at night. And so the parents of the grandkids, they put it in that house. So that had to be the richest hamster of all time. It had its own house, its own farm for 2 years. But what they did do, as Dad said, it's weird, every couple of years they would remodel the entire house. And so they remodeled it 4 or 5 times through the years for it to just sit there empty. But at the end of the day, they're getting up there in years, and once they pass on, well, that house is just going to kind of go away. It's already over 100 years old. And so no matter what they do, it's just going to give itself back over. And the other thing that my great-aunt got that my grandpa wanted was really precious to my family. It's what we called the Arnold Campground. And the Arnold Campground was a little spot on the farm that had been cleared out in a little valley there. And it had a little kind of pond in there, a little stream that we would dam up to swim in. It had outhouses. It had places to tent, camp. It had volleyball courts, everything. And so a lot of our church campouts, even when I was younger, was at that campground. And so we loved that place. But it also went to my great-aunt, and they kind of did the same thing with it. They couldn't bear to sell it or give it away, and they didn't want people using it because they were scared they might hurt it. And so for a few years, they kept up with it. They mowed it, they trimmed it, but eventually they didn't. And now if you go back, you wouldn't recognize it. It looks like it's completely overgrown. And so it's just the earth kind of taking back what was once been set apart for something much more intimate. And so here's what my dad's been doing, and this might sound silly, but there's a reason. He's been building a second Arnold Campground, like an acre away from the first one, but on the land that was actually given to my grandfather. And he's put a lot of time and energy and money into it, but he said this is why he's done it. He said a few years back, my grandmother, before she passed, she asked for one last camping trip with the family. It just so happened it was during COVID. And during COVID, every campground from here past the Mississippi was completely booked up. And so they had nowhere to go. And so he just went and cleared a little spot there by the old gun shack on the farm and said, this is where we're camping. But even after that, when she passed, my grandfather, he still wanted to camp with the family, but he couldn't tow his own camper anymore. So Dad cleared out more spots and invited Grandpa's friends. Because no matter how much it cost him physically, no matter how much financially it cost him, no matter how much hours and energy and blood and sweat and tears, those things didn't matter. What he valued most was the last couple camping trips with my grandfather, the last couple of years of life together. And so as we were talking about that, he did relate a bit of a funny story. He talked about how he was doing the campground and putting it together, and there was an old outhouse next to the gun shack there that he wanted to repurpose for the campground. And so he went in it to kind of clean out everything that was stored up in there, which you know what that is, and so that was not a fun job. But when he got in there the first time, he was surprised to find that there's also something else stored up there. He opened the front door to it, and he said hundreds, maybe even thousands of acorns came piling out because some squirrel had been spending who knows how many years storing every acorn he could in that thing. And it got me thinking, and this is probably stupid, but got me thinking from the perspective of the squirrel. He spent these years storing up every little treasure he can find in this one spot, and then he finds one more, and he goes back one day, and he goes to put it there in the outhouse, and it's all gone. I imagine he was pretty upset at that. In fact, Dad said he had to have been upset because he sent me this picture, and he said he's put in 3 toilet seats now, and that stupid squirrel eats through all of them. And so apparently that's what happens when everything you've been storing up gets stolen. I guess that can be pretty upsetting. Now here's what we're doing today. We're starting a new series, and let me preface it by saying this. In our first service, we've got a couple of junior high students that I'm quite fond of for several reasons. But maybe the biggest reason is because every week, no matter how long I preach, no matter how boring it is, they sit here in the front and they studiously take notes to the very end. Now I'd love to tell you it's because I'm such an engaging speaker. The truth is a little less flattering. They're trying to record all of the embarrassing things I say so they can put them on a t-shirt and make me wear it someday. And so with them in mind, I don't care. They're paying attention. I'll take it. But with them in mind and with the fact that we're coming off of a heavier series with mirrors, we wanted to pivot to something a little more lighthearted. So we're going to do a series that I'm just calling this. It's just called Big Butts. That's our series for the next 4 weeks, Big Butts in the Book of Matthew. I figure they can put that on a t-shirt, they can make money. So this is for them. But what we're going to be looking about is these statements that Jesus makes in the book of Matthew where he's talking about one thing and he pivots and he uses a big butt to do it. And if you haven't picked up on it yet, what we're going to be talking about specifically today is these things that we value most in life, these things that we treasure in our heart. And those things are really important because our desires are always going to follow that which we treasure. And so what Jesus is actually going to teach us in our verses this morning is if you want to determine who or what has your heart, you simply have to look at where your treasure is stored. Because if your treasure is being stored in an outhouse, who has your heart probably isn't who you want to have it in the first place. And so that's what we're going to be learning today, except we're going to say it this way to simplify it. Where your treasure is stored up shows what you value deep down. And so if you want to see what I mean by that, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 6, reading verses 16 through 21, which just start by saying this. It says, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others that they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Now, we're not talking about fasting today. It's not our main point. But this verse about fasting is going to be important for our context for what we are talking about. And so if you don't know what fasting is, I like to call it the spiritual discipline of discomfort. Right? It's that we take away something that's comforting for us that the world can give us, and we remove it for a time, usually food, but it can be anything, so that we can more desperately seek the face of God, so that we can grow in intimacy with God. But the key part about fasting is it can't be something like that you like. Like, it has to be something that when you give it up, it hurts a little bit, right? So I can't say, like, I want to grow closer to Jesus, so I'm going to fast from broccoli for a month, right? Like, that doesn't work. It has to hurt and cost us a little bit. And the reason that's the way it is, and I love this because Jesus says when you fast, he assumes that we are seeking his presence desperately. He assumes that we will be giving up things of this world to seek him. He says when we fast, right? There's a certain way we do it because fasting reveals the condition of our heart. Right? We talked in our Mirror series about sometimes we profess God with our lips, but he actually doesn't have our heart. Well, heart is revealed through fasting because what person in their right mind, if Jesus doesn't really have their heart, is going to deny themselves of some pleasure and cause themselves discomfort to seek Jesus, right? That's not going to happen. And so these verses are really about the condition of our heart. And that's important because Jesus says there's some hypocrites around. And the hypocrites he's talking about are the Pharisees, and here's why. Back in Jesus' day, there was only one day by law that you had to fast all year long. It was the Day of Atonement, just one day. But the Pharisees were known for fasting twice a week. Now, the fact that that's what they were known for is in and of itself a problem. Because here's what they would do. They would dress up in certain clothes and they would disfigure their faces. So they'd go around telling everybody, oh, I'm fasting. I'm holier than you. I'm more spiritual than you. You got to listen to me. I'm important. I have a special relationship with God, right? And so what they were doing is they were seeking the attention of man. And Jesus says they got what they wanted. They got the attention of man. They got their reward. But unfortunately for them, that was their reward in full. And they would get nothing else, right? Because Jesus says there's a problem here. Here's what makes them hypocrites. He says you can't call yourself a man of God while deep down seeking the attention of man. Right? You can't. He says you can't say that I'm a person of God while desperately seeking the attention of people more than God. You just can't do it. That's what makes them hypocrites. And so here's what he says instead. If you follow me, he says, here's what you'll do. He says, so instead, when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And so Jesus says, actually, take extra care so that nobody knows you're fasting. Because again, it's about the condition of the heart. And he says, so what you're going to do, because sometimes we seek God and we start out doing it for the right reasons. But then along the way, our hearts are fickle. So maybe we get some attention for seeking God for the right reasons, and then we get off course. And so Jesus says, no, just take every opportunity you have to let others know you're not. Like, do everything you can so people don't know that's what you're doing in secret. Right? So that it's just between you and God. And again, the reason is because the Pharisees, they got their reward in full, and their reward was that which they could see, the attention of man. But your God who is unseen will reward you if your heart is really his with things that you can't see. Right? Because you can't see salvation. You can't see intimacy with God. You can't see gifts of the Spirit. You can't see those things. You can see the effects of those things, but you can't see them. Right? And so what he's saying is there's a difference here based on the condition of your heart, whether you are seeking the things of this world that you can see or the things of God that you can't see. Let me explain it like this. At a past church, we had a finance meeting one day. I had a board of trustees that oversaw it, and even though it was a smaller church, there was a lot of money in the bank account. I think $750,000 were in the bank. And we had somebody on our trustee team, our finance team, that was concerned about where we were storing that money. Because he basically said, here's the deal. What we're getting as a return is less than inflation, so we're actually losing money by keeping it in these accounts. And he was a gentleman that had done quite well for himself financially and in terms of investment. So he asked to speak to the leadership, and he prepared this presentation. And he started this presentation by saying, at the beginning of church service last week, I looked at my portfolio. And then at the end of the service, I looked at it again. And in that hour, I made $20,000. Now, I'm not sure it had the effect he wanted because all I was thinking is, I'm in the wrong profession here. I made like $500 during that same hour. This isn't even close. But what he was saying was, you guys need to understand what investing is. And you need to understand better ways to do this. So he explained his strategy and his portfolio. And he basically said, I've got these foundational building blocks, right? He's like, I got into Amazon early. So the returns are low, but they're consistent, right? And he says, and I got these middle tier things that I got in a while ago that are paying off now. Things like medicine, like digital medicine. And he explained the top part of his pyramid. He said it's riskier investments. I'm going to have to sit on those a long time. But he bought several different Bitcoin. And he said, I'm probably going to have to sit on those for like 30 years to realize their full value. But that's why they're up here. They're not at the bottom. And what he was saying, he wasn't suggesting the church play the stock market. He was just suggesting the church look at where they were actually storing their resources because there was probably a better way to do it with a greater return. right? And so here's what the committee did. If I remember correctly, they took $10,000 of that $750 and they invested it in something else. Why would they only take $10,000? Here's why I think they only took $10,000, because what they really, really enjoyed was being able to walk across the street to the small town bank and specifically talk to the teller and ask for a banknote and hold it up, and they could see what was there. That was important to them. See, what was most important to them, they would rather be losing money, but at least know where it was stored, than invest in something that they couldn't see. That's what they would do. And so what do they really value? Because, I mean, they could have been doing crazy things with that amount of money. They could have been planting churches, starting discipleship groups, feeding the hungry, right? So what did they value? They didn't value money the most. If they did, they would have put it in a higher yielding account. No, what they valued most was their status. They loved being on the finance committee. They loved being on the board. They didn't want to mess with that. They valued their reputation. If they took risks, they could have maybe a bad reputation. And again, they'd lose for what they worked through. They valued wealth. They valued that number being in front of them, what they could see. Because what that wealth provided was sustenance. They could live on that. They could survive on that. If they could keep that in the bank, they wouldn't have to do anything. It gave them security. No matter what happened, no matter what came through, they'd always be able to weather it, which ultimately means it gave them comfort. They didn't have to have any sense of urgency with their resources. They could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, as long as that money was in the bank. That's what they valued. And so you thought, man, it's dumb. They had this investment expert. They could have done crazy things. I can't believe, why wouldn't they do something different? But before you get too hard on them, maybe you have to understand that we do the same things with our life. See, we would rather invest in things with diminishing returns because at least we can see the reward now than invest in something we can't see yet. That's how we live our life. We would rather invest in things we can see, like status and reputation and wealth and sustenance and security and comfort, because we can see all of those things. We can put our finger on those things, but we can't see these other things. And so we would rather invest in diminishing returns because at least we can see it than in something that we can't see. That's why the heart of fasting is so important, because it's about what is unseen, eternal relationship with Jesus. So that's why Jesus takes such great care here then in verse 19 to say this: do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin, and some of your translations will say rust, it's the same word in the Greek, where vermin and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. Now, this storing up that Jesus is talking about, it has a connotation of that which we grind for. So if you're grinding for something, that's what has your heart. That's what you're committed to. That's what you're really working to. And he says, do not store up, do not grind in this life treasures on earth, where moths and rust and vermin and destroy. And so here's what he's saying. There's two things here that I want to point out real quick. And the first is kind of an asterisk statement. He says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. God isn't against wealth. He's not against people being wealthy. God is against people loving wealth, because that which we love is that which we will serve, and we can't serve both God and money, okay? And so he's not against having wealth. Every one of us in this room is wealthy, right? Compared to the rest of the world, everybody's wealthy. He's not against wealth. He's against loving wealth. In fact, sometimes God will even bless us, and he will give us wealth of this world. But it's not to be stored up for ourselves. Okay, it's to be invested for the sake of the gospel and for the sake of others. All right, so sometimes he will even give us wealth, but it's never to be hoarded for ourselves. It's to be invested for others. Okay, so that's the first difference. He's not against sin, or excuse me, he is against sin. He's not against wealth. It's sinful to love wealth. Okay, there are two things. But the second thing is this: when he talks about these treasures, he always is going to give a location. Because he says, "Do not store up for yourselves these treasures where? On earth." And there's a reason for that. Because where we store our treasure is going to show us where our heart is. And if our heart is on earth, well, that has a bad ROI. That is a bad return on investment that has diminishing returns, because the earth has a bad bank manager. Okay, let me explain that if you don't understand it. Paul says that Satan is the god of this age, little g. What that means is we are in the church age. There was the age where Jesus was here. There's the age where Jesus is coming back. And in between is the church age. And Satan is the God, little g, of this age. So he's the boss. Now, he's not the boss of your life. Jesus is the boss of your life. You've been called out of this world, right? But Satan is the boss of this earth and this world, which means he has implemented a policy of what I call sin squared. Right? Sin multiplying on itself. That's the effect of this world. And the effects of that are things that we've identified even through science. Things like the law of entropy. Law of entropy stating that everything moves from a state of order to disorder, from order to chaos. Everything moves from how God created it, which is orderly, to how Satan wants it, which is disorder. And it's going to stay that way until when? Until Jesus comes back to restore it to how God created it in the first place. But we're not there yet, which means right now, Satan is the little g god of this age. He's a bad bank manager. And when you have laws like entropy, anything on this earth is naturally losing its value. Your dollar has lost value while you're sitting here. Listen, everything on this world is losing value. So when he says things like moths destroy, he's talking about what? Like clothes. We like clothes. I can put clothes on in front of the mirror and look in the mirror and see value and see the reward. We like things like gold. Precious metals. I can polish the gold that I have. I can check my bank account, right? And we like things like storing up grain and storing it in the grain bins and saying, I can feed my family for generations with this grain that's stored here. Problem is entropy. Problem is sin squared. All of that's going to lose its value. And so here's what we do. We spend all of our time and our money and our resources doing our best to delay the law of entropy. I'll buy a cedar chest for that dress. I will polish my metals. I will breed barn cats. Right? We do whatever we can to protect these things that we're treasuring that have the diminishing returns. And so that's why Jesus says this last thing. But even if you do that, guess what? Thieves break in and steal. Thieves break in and steal. Someone comes in and takes your acorns. I guess that makes my dad Satan in this analogy. I apologize. Listen, he's talking to first century Palestinians here. You know what their houses were made of? Mud. So no matter what they did to try to protect the treasures they had in their home, someone could just go through the wall and steal it anyway. It doesn't surprise you that Satan's referred to as the thief in Scripture. And so what Jesus is saying here is this. He's saying there is no amount of human effort, none, that can stop the thief. So if your treasures are stored on earth, you can never feel secure. I need to say that again. There's no amount of human effort that can stop the thief. He's the God of this age. And so if your treasures are stored on earth, you can never feel secure. The only way you can feel secure is if your heart and your treasures are out of reach. In a place where Satan doesn't exist, right? But let's look a little deeper too. What do those things represent? What does moths eating represent? Clothing. What does clothing represent in the first century? Status and reputation, right? You had the Pharisees that would have the tassels on their robes that would signify they're extra special. You had the high priest that had a special set of clothing to show that he was the one in charge and he was the authority. That's what people wore. You see in the New Testament, Paul warning against all the time the wearing of the extensive clothes because it's a status symbol. And so clothing represents that status. It represents the reputation. And what do precious metals represent? The rust. Well, gold, sustenance, wealth, feeling like you've got it made. And what does that grain represent? That represents your security. That represents Easy Street. You can store it up in the barns. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to work anymore. And so what do all of these things represent? It should sound familiar. Status, reputation, wealth, sustenance, security, and comfort. Treasures we can see. Don't store up those treasures on earth that you can see. They have diminishing returns. Instead, Jesus says this. He says this in 20. But, big but do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. And so what Jesus is saying here, he's given a different location. It was earth, now it's heaven. You know what's not in heaven? Entropy. Why? Because Satan isn't in heaven. Heaven is set apart. And so the only place we can have security with our heart and with our treasure is not on earth, but in heaven. So if we are storing our treasures on earth and earth has our heart, friends, the enemy can steal that at any point. If we store our heart in heaven, that is the only security that we can have, is giving our heart fully to Jesus and knowing he's got it, because when Jesus has it, Satan can't have it. But anything that Jesus doesn't have is free game for Satan. And so there is no security, there is no safety. It doesn't matter what you do to try to delay the laws of entropy. You will die. Grandma's house is going to be taken over and fall down. That campground doesn't exist anymore. But if we store our treasures in heaven, Jesus has never failed us. And he never will. And so don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Because where your heart is, and that is our greatest treasure. That is our greatest investment. So our greatest investment is our heart. Don't invest it in the world. Don't invest it in rewards you can see. Don't invest it in status, reputation, wealth, sustenance, security, and comfort. Invest it in the things of God, because they won't return void, and that's what gives you security. So even when the world falls apart around you, it doesn't matter. Jesus has your heart. When things decay around you, it doesn't matter. Jesus has your heart. When you're scared, it doesn't matter. Jesus has your heart. When the stock market crashes, Jesus has your heart. When political figures are corrupt, it doesn't matter. Jesus has your heart. When you can't afford food, it doesn't matter. Jesus has your heart. And when Jesus has your heart, that is where we get our only real sense of security, because what Jesus has, Satan can't have. Amen. But if we're on this world, if we're storing our heart on this earth, well, that's fair game. And Satan can have at that. Now, in case you're not figuring out what I'm saying, imagine it like this. Let's say you go to a family wedding. And you meet some old guy, white hair, you've never seen him before, but you kind of hit it off. Drinking, you got food, you got water, you got cheese, you got cake, having a great time. 2 hours in, you're telling stories. You're like, I really like this guy. The wedding ends. You're like, ah. But then suddenly, before he leaves, says, by the way, my name is Warren Buffett. And he says, I like you, so I want to tell you a secret. And the secret is this. I have an investment that you can make. He says, and you can't lose money on it. It's impossible, because I'm backing it myself. He says, I have an investment you can make, but here's the catch. It's only available for a very short time. It's only available for a year. But every dollar you put into this investment for the next year is going to pay out $100 every year after. Let me ask you, if he said that to you, how would your life change? I bet you wouldn't buy any more pumpkin spice lattes. You're canceling Netflix and Disney Plus. You're probably selling your house, your car, and everything you own to put it all into that. You're probably picking up a second or a third job, because you know if you do this right, you can live for tomorrow like you never dreamed was even possible. Well, that's what Jesus has done for us. That's what Jesus, it's something he's called us to, that he's backed with his life, so we can't lose. And it's for a short time, but to say that the returns are 100 to 1 is lowballing. Because on this earth, we can retire. In the last few years of our life, when our bodies are broken and have very little left to give, we can survive for a couple of years without working. That's what this world promises. What Jesus promises is eternity in paradise with a new body. That's worth way more. And so that's what Jesus is asking us to do. He says, don't invest in things of this world. Invest in things of the kingdom, because what I have for you, you can't see it yet, but it is so, so, so much better than anything this world can offer you. And so that's what I mean when I say where your treasure is stored up, it shows what you value deep down. If your treasure is in heaven, then Jesus has your heart. But if your treasure is on earth, you can only get the rewards that man can give you. But when we give it to God, it will never return void, because Jesus has never failed us, and he never will. Amen. So that means it becomes really important. What does it mean to store up for ourselves treasures in heaven? So here's what I'm going to do. Try to be practical with it. But I went to Charles Schwab website. I don't even know if I said that right. It's a place I'd normally never go. And I printed off the 5 top investment strategies. So I want to give you the 5 top investment strategies for the world, and then I'm going to contrast that with what it looks like to invest in the kingdom. And so the first is this. The first worldly investment principle is always invest in compound interest. right? And that's a good financial rule. In other words, what it means is you literally store up and you hoard funds into one account where interest grows on interest, and the more money you keep, the more money you get. Well, in the kingdom, it also deals with compound interest, but taking a compound interest in others, because in the kingdom, the more you give, the more you get. Right? And so I'm not just talking about money. You ever heard the phrase, give your time and your talents and your treasure? You know, that's scriptural. That comes from the parable of the Good Samaritan. I can tell what you and what this is convicting for me too, I can tell what we value most by looking at our bank account and our calendar. And so here's what I need you to ask yourself. When you look at your calendar, is everything on there just to benefit you, or is some of it going to benefit others? And when you look at your bank account, is everything in there going to benefit you, or is some of it going to the benefit of others? And when you look at the talents that God has given you, do you only use them to gain reputation and prestige and attention, or are you using them to benefit others and benefit the kingdom? Right? Because the more time and talent treasure you give away for the sake of others, the more you are investing your heart in heaven. The second thing is this. The second worldly investment principle is to diversify your portfolio. You don't want too much risk in one area, so the more places you are invested, the stronger your portfolio is. But kingdom investing says, simplify your priorities. As small as you can get it, because the less you are invested in the things of this world, the more you are solely invested in Jesus, the stronger your faith is going to be. And let me ask you a hard question here, and I'll clarify in a second, but how many of you miss COVID? I don't mean COVID the disease, I mean COVID the culture. Do you remember COVID when all extracurriculars were canceled? You remember COVID when we had family dinners again? Remember COVID when we could sit out on our back porch and enjoy God's creation together again? When church became a priority again? Do you remember COVID? Listen, I miss that. Here's sometimes what we need to do. Sometimes we need to look at what our life is doing, and we need to see how much time we're devoting to things that have no return on investment. And sometimes we need to say, I need to scale back here. Because we commit our lives, we grind our lives, what we're committed to. I'm going to ask you right now, what do you grind for? Because if what you're grinding for is all these other things, that's what has your heart. Sometimes we need to say, this has no return on investment. And so we need to simplify. I'm not telling you to stop being a part of the world. You're supposed to be in the world, we're just not to be of it. We can participate, it just doesn't get our heart. God gets our heart, and he gets our first fruits of our heart. Right? So we need to ask ourselves, what things in my life do I need to say no to so I can simplify and focus more on God, because that has eternal reward? What kind of things do my kids need that has eternal reward? And if that's out of balance, you got to bring that back. Okay? And so that's the second thing, is to simplify your priorities. The third thing is this. It's a long one, but it says, establish a financial plan based on your goals. Those goals should be realistic, and then you should make changes to those plans as circumstances change. That's what the world says with finance, but what the kingdom says is establish a spiritual plan based on God's goals, and those goals you shouldn't be able to accomplish. They shouldn't be realistic at all unless God shows up, and then you shouldn't let anything change them, because Satan's going to get upset when you actually make a plan and start to work for it, right? So let me say this. I can get on Facebook every day, and I will see a weight loss plan come up on ads. Camera must be turned on, I don't know. I can get on Facebook every day and see a financial plan for retirement. Must have access to my bank account, I don't know. But you know what I've never been given a plan for? I've never seen a spiritual plan pop up on ads, ever. And so let me ask you real quick, how many of you have a spiritual plan? Do you have a spiritual plan to, I want to complain less this year and I want to be more grateful? Do you have a spiritual plan for saying, by the end of the year, I want to be able to pray for 30 minutes at a time without stopping? Do you have a spiritual plan for sharing the gospel with other people? Do you have a spiritual plan for reading the Bible? Do you have a spiritual plan for any of those things? Because if we don't plan for it, listen, the world's going to get our time. But when we make a plan for it, it will return. Because let me tell you about this. As you work that plan, you will get increase in what you've planned for. God will bring you increase. And then guess what? Circumstances will change, because Satan's still the little g god of this world, and guess what he hates? He hates a spiritual plan. He likes spiritual complacency, not spiritual plans. So if you make a spiritual plan, God will bring growth. He will bring a return, and then Satan will attack it. And so at that point, don't abandon it. Don't change it. Push into it because God is working and Satan's getting ticked off, right? And so establish a spiritual plan, make unrealistic goals that only God can accomplish, and then don't change that plan when Satan starts to mess with you, okay? That's the third one. The fourth one is this. Investment principle is to build in protections against significant losses. What that means is hedge your bets against the market, but we're for the market in the kingdom. We're for other people. And so instead what we do is we expect loss and we lean into it for the sake of God's glory and the sake of others. You know, security is a lie, right? Like you can't be secure. At any point in time, your identity can be stolen, your house can be broken into, you can have your bank account emptied. Listen, your health isn't secure. Satan can take that. And like all of these things, nothing is secure. It's a lie. Ring doorbell is so impressive and it has made billions because it cheaply makes us have this false sense of security. It's an affordable false sense of security. Even insurance. I read an article this past week where 5 of the top insurance companies in our country have now put in provisions where you still have to have insurance, but if there's a natural disaster that takes out your home, as long as they cite global warming, they don't have to cover it. Listen, security is a lie. There is no such thing as security in this world. The only thing that we can actually be secure in is that pain and suffering will come in this world, but in Jesus we have eternity in another one that is much longer and much better than this one. So I'm not telling you to be stupid. Listen, if I get a choice between living in a safe neighborhood or an unsafe one for my daughter, I'm grateful to have the resources to choose the safe neighborhood, right? So I'm not saying being stupid. What I'm saying is don't worship security. Don't worship comfort. Suffering is going to come, but as Christians, when suffering comes, we count it as pure joy because it means God is working. And when we count that as pure joy, we receive a heavenly reward, even though we suffer. So don't try to protect yourself against suffering. Don't try to protect yourself against losses. Expect them. They will come. And when they do, we lean into them for the sake of others so others can see the glory of God. Okay? And so that's it. And I saved the fifth and the last one for this because I agree with it to the most part. The most important principle, Charles Schwab says, is it pays to invest early. So start investing today. That's free. I'm not even charging you for that. It's right here. So here's what I agree. It does pay early. We should invest today. I just disagree with what we are investing in and where we're storing it. Instead, invest your heart in heaven, and we will have good treasure because of where it's stored. So here's your most practical step today. Okay? Next week is Back to Church Sunday. First, be here. Invest in something spiritual. It's worth it. I know football's on. I know I preach a long time. Most of us can record it, okay? But here, go back to that belong board, pick one of those blue tees out, and take it home with you, and pray this week and say, God, send me someone to invite to church. And just give that tee away to them. Give that tee to someone and say, would you like to come to church with me on Sunday? The worst they can say is no. I had a woman evangelize to me in the park this past week, trying to share Jesus with me while I was trying to rehearse my sermon. She was walking, and she just stopped to tell me about her church and how much she loves Jesus and asked if I wanted to come. I did. I wanted to go. I just thought this would be awkward if, Listen, share your faith. Take that tea. I'm just asking you to invite someone to church and say, we want to have you because what you're investing in is something eternal. You're investing in something, not only storing up for yourselves treasures in heaven when you do that, but maybe for them too. Right? That's the beautiful thing about heaven, guys. Heaven's a giant show of Oprah. Right? Everybody, you get salvation. Right? You get fullness of joy. You get fullness of peace. Everybody wins in heaven. So invest in that because everybody loses down here. So show people why we are set apart. Show people the glory of God. Invite them, bring them to church and say, you know what? I've got something better for you. Because this world is hard, but God is greater. And our faith and our heart can be secure in Jesus. And I'll finish with this morning. This is 2 weeks ago before my parents came to town. Chris and I went to Sam's Club. It was a Wednesday, and needed to get food for my family coming to town, and I didn't want to go. I don't like shopping. I get like nods in the back of my shoulder, and my back hurts, and I just hate it. But we were going to Springfield, and the idea of having food options was nice. So I was like, yes, I'll go to Springfield. And then she laid on me, no, we're going to eat at the cafe at Sam's Club. So we went a little back and forth on that one. I said, I'm only going to Springfield for food. But she won. She always does. So we go to Sam's Club, and we walk into the cafe, and I've never been there before, and it's packed. It's like standing room only, but it's like Wednesday, middle of the day. So it's all retirement folks. I had no idea. I'm like, what in the world is happening here? So she goes, she gets our food, she comes back, she's got 3 giant slices of pizza, a pizza pretzel, 2 large drinks, and an 18-inch churro. It was delicious, by the way. And she's like, how much do you think this cost? I said, I don't know, $40? She said, this cost $11. It's like, it's my new favorite restaurant. You know what I realized in that moment? I realized why all those old folks were there. Because they're all on a fixed income. And this is the last place they can get a meal together that they can actually afford it. And you know what I felt? Anger, frustration. I was mad. These folks had worked their whole life to store up money, to put their money away, to enjoy retirement. Now they're at a place where they can only eat at Sam's Club because there's not enough to go around. So then I got mad for me, and I'm like, and we're about to drop $400 on groceries. It would have lasted us a month before. It'll barely last us a week this time. And then we go to change Essie in the bathroom, and we had to wait for 10 minutes as some Gen Z was using his own personal outhouse, the family bathroom. So I'm mad at that. Yeah, I know I sound more like a boomer right now than a millennial. That's okay. I'm leaning into it. Thank you. And so I was in my own pity party there. I was upset about the condition, the state of this world. And then I got Jesus kind of looked down and convicted me from the oddest place. Outside of the bathroom walls, big enough for the whole store to see, there was a quote on the wall right there. It was from Helen Walton. It said this. She said, it's not what you gather, but what you scatter that tells the world the kind of life that you've lived. Now, I didn't know this about the Waltons, but they used to teach Sunday school in their church. And when Walmart was founded, it was akin to being a slave to work in retail. That's what they considered it. And the reason and the way he got past that is he hired Christians, and he convinced people, he says, the one thing that's okay to be a slave for is to be a servant leader with gratitude for the sake of others. That's how Walmart grew. That's why Chick-fil-A alters traffic patterns. Listen, this life, it's hard. And there's rough things. But at the end of the day, as Christians, we are all called in servitude to others. We make ourselves slaves to Jesus Christ because his life is better and because it's worth it and because this is temporary. But what he gives us is forever. And I understand that it's frustrating to live right now. The cost of living is astronomical. Everything's politicized. You don't know who you can trust. You don't know what's going on in the world. You can't trust anything. You have drugs, you have violence, you have people dying, you have all this stuff, but hear me out. Jesus told us it would be this way. Jesus told us it would be this way. Because right now, Satan is still the little g god of this world. But as Christians, we've been called out of this world. As Christians, we live differently. And so we still may suffer occasionally from the effects of being in a sinful world, but as Christians, as long as Jesus has our heart, it doesn't matter what we go through. It doesn't matter our struggles. It doesn't matter how hard it is because we have eternity secure with Jesus when he has our whole heart. And that doesn't change because the thief can't get to it. There's no entropy in heaven. Heaven is a place where we get eternity with Jesus, period. So I understand it's hard. And I understand a lot of the messages that I preach are like ultra convicting, and they're not always as happy or encouraging, but that's what this is. I want to tell you today, there are benefits to us serving Jesus. We don't do it for the benefits. We do it because we love Jesus, but there are benefits. We can't store up for ourselves treasures on earth, but you know what? We can't store up treasures in heaven for other people. We store treasures in heaven up for us. It's just that other people benefit from it too, and Jesus benefits because he gets his reward. That's what I mean when I say it's like Oprah. Everybody wins. When we store our hearts in heaven, So don't grind for things in this life and give your heart to things in this life that have these diminishing returns. Give your heart to Jesus, because when he has it, the thief, he's not going to break in and steal anything, because he's rendered powerless in the sight of Jesus. So my friends, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven and spend eternity with Jesus. Amen. Would you pray with me? Father God, I thank you that no matter how many times I've been swayed by the sparkling things of this world, that you decided to make yourself a slave, that you decided to go to the cross, that you decided that present comfort wasn't worth it, that you decided to give yourself for us. So God, my prayer today is one of encouragement. I ask that everybody in here would understand that as Christians, I know life can be hard, and I know it can be difficult, but we get to walk out of here with eternal life, and we get to walk out of here with an understanding that you win, and we get to walk out of here knowing that this is just going to seem like just a blip when we get eternity with you, with no more pain and no more sorrow, but only complete joy and complete peace and love. And God, we even get to taste part of that now as a foreshadowing of what's to come. But God, just let us walk in that peace today. Let us walk in that joy today. Let us walk in that blessed hope today, that you've called us out of this world so we may live here now. But God, it's not our home. Our home and our heart is with you. In Jesus' name I pray.